They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Well, alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph. I have got a great guest for you, but first, James is back. Hey, dude.
How's it going?
Fantastic. We're into the first days of spring. The weather is predictably insane, and the yellow stuff is starting to pile up outside. It's the yellow powder.
The good old pollen, huh? It's coming in. It's that time of year.
It is that time of year. The pine trees are doing their pine tree thing. And today, guys, we're going to talk about a topic we actually haven't covered on the podcast, of all things we haven't covered, emotional intelligence and its role in leadership and a little fun with crisis management and such. But let's introduce the guest. Well, I mean, I think a bunch of you guys know her because you guys suggested her. And so here she is live in the flesh. This is live. If you're watching this or if you're, it's recorded. But Jessica Hoffman, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Rob. Appreciate being here. James, thanks for your time. Hello. Happy day, all that good stuff. I've been a fan for quite a while, so this is pretty cool. So shout out to everybody out there, who's fans too. My name is Jess Hoff. I've been in the space for about 15 years now. Federal, state, local government, private industry as well. Currently doing some deputy CISO work, coming from audit and compliance, that fun stuff. It's really sexy, I know. But yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, for having me on. We're talking about emotional stuff. I love it. Let's do it. All
right, so let's set this up because I'd like to at least define the top. What is emotional intelligence? Is that different than the EIQ? Is that the same thing? Tell me about emotional intelligence and kind of your take on it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, but let's just take it back for a moment. As far as emotional intelligence, I'm not going to tell you guys how old I am, but, I've been in the game long enough to when I started in cyber, there wasn't any college degrees in it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, everybody's like, ooh, cyber, let's get into cyber. So, when we're talking about where we've come from as far as cybersecurity as a profession, we didn't really talk about emotional intelligence back then. But at the same time, when we're dealing with crisis, when we're explaining how we need more money for funding, to buy these tools, the safeguard, and we need resources and all of that, we were automatically, if you were thinking that way, you were automatically talking to your audience, right? So emotional intelligence is really nothing new. Per definition, the capacity to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions and to empathize effectively with the emotions of others. So basically understanding what we need, right? How we operate and being able to articulate by understanding who we're talking to. So knowing your audience, you know what I mean? And it's not like we're being nice or kiss ass or, emotionally available. It's just really understanding the situation and certainly talk a little bit more about that. But if I could add, as far as it's really cool. I really like this topic because like I said, I feel like we've come a long way as cybersecurity as a profession to where we're talking about the human factor, the psychology factor of why are people clicking on these links when that there's no Nigerian prince out there that you're inheriting from. You know what I mean? Like, why are we doing this stuff? Not just, your grandma or somebody who knows nothing about cyber, no offense, grandma, but also like your workforce. Why is your workforce doing these things, right? Like after they've done how many hours of training? So I think the psychology factor of this is so like new now, and it's awesome that we're talking about it, because I really think that it could help us be more effective in executing our cybersecurity programs.
All right, so right on the tail of that, right? You talk about understanding, having the capacity to understand somebody else's needs. I feel like, James, you and maybe we haven't talked about this topic specifically, but you and I have covered this. The cybersecurity industry's tragic relationship with understanding the needs of anybody that is not us.
Well, I think, a lot of that carries over less so about the emotional aspect of it and more just on the business side of it. I think that's where we've covered so much of it is, security has to understand the business side, right? And then you have this whole other realm where it's like you have to understand the business side, but also the emotional side that comes with the business side. How do you portray that to the users on that other side, right?
Yeah. And if I could emphasize, there's 5 different, so this is all definitions, so this is cool. So I feel like it's awesome too, because we have like actual, like, it's been defined what this means. And James, to your point, like, yeah, we're looking at it from a business perspective, but now it's like, okay, how do I motivate Jan to do her job? What makes her tick? Like, what really makes her tick? Not just as a person, but like maybe some neurodiversities, maybe some, background, some cultural differences, things like that. So as far as from a definition perspective, to have a high level of emotional intelligence, you're 1, self-aware, 2, self-regulation, 3, motivated, 4, empathetic, and 5, have social skills. So going back to that example of Jan on our security team, for instance, knowing how to motivate her to do her job. So again, this isn't novel. What's her strengths and weaknesses, right? Where does she best fit? How can I make sure she has what she needs to be successful? And I think, honestly, coming from 20, 30 years ago. So I just watched Edward Scissorhands yesterday. Okay, bear with me.
Great movie.
Great movie, right?
Love me some Johnny Depp.
Oh my gosh. So like at the one scene when all the husbands are coming home at the same time in the neighborhood, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so like old, right? It's not like that anymore. Like,
right. It's very Stepford Wives.
Yeah, it's not like, that's not the world we're living in anymore. So just to understand how far we've come, as a society, as far as working, who we're working with on a day-to-day basis, I think that's where this comes into play, because it's not like suck it up and do your job. It's really, we have to understand who we're working with on a more granular level, as far as the empathy, understanding, building a culture within our team that is safe and trust, right? Especially when we're talking about like incident response and all that stuff. We got to trust each other to do our jobs, or we're going to be all over each other, right?
All right. So I've got a couple of things I want to pull on here. I'm making notes as you were talking. So one of the things that I think is, and we're going to get into this whole safe environment in a second, because we're going to properly tackle that one. But
no hip tackles.
Right. Yeah, no, we don't want to tackle. We want a 2-hand touch. Flag. Anyway, we're getting flag football references. They're not translating well. Moving on, James, you're in trouble. But you just mentioned cultural differences. This is one of the spots where I think early 2000s we hit that wall hard, because we started IT started going global, and we did a lot of outsourcing, right? A lot of offshoring, and I firsthand witnessed the fact that you cannot manage a team in the U.S., heck, even different regional teams within the U.S., broadly within the U.S., with our notions of work ethic, broadly shared cultural values and life experience and all that, with somebody that we just hired, for example, in India or Pakistan or any of those places, or South Korea, because this was like, it just did, like, trying to manage different people with our perception, our kind of US centric vision was a catastrophe. right? Talk to me about that more and navigating that, because I think that's really important. Because we have a global workforce today, right? Cyber people, IT people are everywhere. We speak different languages. We support different, different cultures. We support different countries, sometimes for the same team and sometimes for managers. And so it is not, again, having experienced it is not trivial to try to manage a team or even work on a team that is culturally so very diverse from the way we think here in the US.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ralph. And let me just do my disclaimer. I am not a social person, or what's it called? Like, I'm not a psychologist. Okay, I'm not an HR, but these are very important questions to ask from a leadership perspective, right? Because across different time zones, that means some people it's 9 o'clock, some people it's 5 o'clock, middle of the night, whatever, right? Not to mention any cultural differences with religion, different prayer times, just different sacred times throughout the day or throughout the calendar year, language barriers. I mean, there's so many different things. So I think that that's absolutely a real conversation, and it's even translate to where we are within our groups now. I mean, I have a very diverse team, which is great, right? We all bring our individual strengths and weaknesses, and they all shine in different ways. So I think, just my thoughts on it is that, you have to, I don't know what kind of training you would call it, but, when we're bringing it back to emotional intelligence and awareness, self-awareness as a manager, as peers, as colleagues, understanding what that other individual's life is like to some degree, right? So mindful observations, self-reflection about how you feel, about how they would feel about the same thing. Empathy, this emotional intelligence is a lot around empathy, right? So it's not that I'm like, oh, Ralph, tell me all your problems, cry, boo-hoo. We don't got time for that, right? We got work to do. But, let me understand what you're going through to some degree so I can be like, okay, well, let me help you with that workload, or let's divide it like this. So, having that empathy to some degree, but there still be some barriers and challenges, I think, but from an emotional intelligence perspective, again, empathy is a big one. Understanding each other and what's driving your motivation, the social skills there. So I really think, as far as having a global team, there would be some onus on the leadership to really have some kind of awareness training, as far as, all right, we have folks in these different countries. Let's talk about what's going on in these different countries, or have some kind of even share. I don't know, but when we're going back to talking about the safe and trusting environment, I think that's very much it, right? By having those conversations about what makes everybody tick and understanding how to motivate each other and how to trust each other is what leads to that safe environment.
All right, I'm going to flip this around then, because as an occasional South Park fan, there was a recent episode where Cartman got mad that he was supposed to go. He's had to go work, right? And so he went and goes work. He goes to a synopsis. He goes to work for a company. He's like, I'm going to I want to work from home because I'm entitled to, and I'm taking my mental health day. Today's my mental health day. And he's like, I'm quitting. I'm going to start my own job. And what he discovers is, expletive. Nobody wants to work these days. I have to go do this myself. And so how do we get, I think it's a very interesting analysis of real life, because there is James and I were just talking about this off air. There's a really wide gap between the way we grew up, which was, you're not dead, go rub some dirt on it, keep going, versus I have seen some places that just way overdo it. And I mean, everybody's just coddled and, you're having a tough day. Well, it's okay. Go into the wellness pod for a few hours. You don't want to have we can't challenge you today. I don't want to make you emotionally not safe. That word is gotten to the point where it's so overused. And I don't want to get in the diatribe, but everything has to be safe. We have to have safety, and, we have to make you feel safe. Life's, as an employer, I'm responsible for your health and safety, obviously. Right? I mean, I'm not going to stick you in a coal mine and be like, hey, it's your fault the thing caves in. That's not how that works. But also, how do you find a good maybe this is an opinion. I don't not to say it in any official capacity, Jess, but how do you like look at that and go, where's the middle line where I am both taking care of my employees and emotionally and like as a whole person, but also not to the point where like everybody, everybody gets everything they want and
not being taken advantage of.
That's it. That's a good way to put it. I was going to try to avoid using the word snowflakes, but I succeeded, but then I didn't quite get the words out.
Okay. Well, yeah. First of all, Rob, are you talking about the episode where Cartman starts his hot dog stand?
Yes, that's it.
No. All right. I am always South Park fan, so they're so ahead of their time.
It's so good.
Every time I see somebody begging for money in the middle of the road, I think about, don't give it to him, don't give it to him. Okay. So yeah, don't be setting me up for stuff with that question, Rob. Okay, there is a thin line. I agree. Okay, and let me bring it back. I think safe and trust goes hand in hand. So I work with an amazing team right now, and I truly think that the reason we have such good collaboration and cohesiveness is because we've learned to respect each other, respect each other's work, respect each other's space, and trust that you'll get it done. Now, trust is a very complicated word.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all had situations where we're working with teams and we trusted somebody to get it done, or even yourself. I mean, I'm not perfect. There's times when I didn't do what I needed to do, or for whatever reason. So I mean, I'm wholly accountable. Okay, not very often.
Nobody's throwing stones over here.
So, but just allowing people to be themselves and grow, and going back to the emotional intelligence, within cybersecurity, it's a very complicated, stressful job, and we need to have good communication. We need to be able to understand who's got our back, who's going to handle, who's going to handle what, when they're going to handle it. Because most of the time it's not just one person, right? It's a collaborative team. And even coming from being an auditor, like my audit teams, when I was testing or when I was managing the teams, it didn't matter, because first you have to prepare, right? You got to get the scope, you got to get the inventory list, you got to do the samples, you got to do all these things. And it really is all in building blocks. So if one person isn't pulling their weight, it could be a problem. And you need to figure that out sooner than later, because then you have to shift the workload somewhere else. So when I'm talking about having a safe environment where you trust people and tying it back to emotional intelligence, it really does come down to individuals being self-aware. So that's a hard pill too. Are you overloading yourself, right? When we're talking about mental health, are you doing too much, right? Or, what's that work-life balance there? Being able to self-regulate that, as far as being able to communicate that with, your team and making sure they understand. And honestly, you don't got to give me a whole bunch of excuses. I don't care if you don't got to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. Okay. Just go to the bathroom. Right. But don't just don't just leave me hanging. Okay. Being able to motivate and empathize and the social skills with the communication. So again, I feel like this isn't anything really novel. Really, this is nothing new, right? When we're talking about good leadership, good teamwork, everybody pulling their weight, understanding strengths and weaknesses, this isn't anything new. But I think it's really fascinating, because now we're getting a little bit more deeper as far as you understanding, or I'm understanding myself and how I respond to things and how I ask for help or ask you to do your job or motivate you. Like, how do I come off as, a jerk, or am I asking too much, or, so I think that's where this is a little different.
So talk to me about establishing credibility, because that's something I know we wanted to talk about a little bit. Because oftentimes in particularly in leadership roles, people just show up and it's the do what I say because that's your job. And I think establishing credibility is oftentimes overlooked. You have to do it to go speak on stage, but you don't really have to do it to go lead a team necessarily in a lot of places that I've worked. And so, I've worked for great leaders that did absolutely establish that credibility with their team to make sure that everybody understood why they're there, what brought them there. But there are, and people followed, right? And then there are those times where somebody says, I'm the boss, do what I say, or get out. And you're like, well, that's great, but I have ideas too. And you haven't really set us up for understanding why it is that, aside from I'm the boss, there's got to be a better reason for that. So talk to me about establishing credibility, because I think that's kind of an important and really kind of a key piece of especially leadership.
Well, that's so timely because I got some new leadership recently, and I think one of the first things you would want to hear, well, what I would want to hear from new leadership, and what I do is, hey, I know I'm new. I don't know anything, right? I know something. I know enough to be in this position, right? Because, we gotta, that imposter syndrome is real. And, I'm a woman of color in cybersecurity in a leadership position. It is a little, I've had some different challenges, sure. But at the end of the day, I'm where I am for a reason. You got to know that, right? So that's first off. You got to be confident, but not cocky, right? Okay. Follow me now. You follow me now. All right. I'm here for a reason. I don't know everything. I'm not trying to disrupt everything. I really just want to learn, and I'm here to help you. And I think it's really that simple. How can I help you? And I'm not gonna lie, I stole that from New Amsterdam. I do a lot of lifting, but how can I help? I love that term. How can I help? And that is what I always ask everybody I work with. How can I help you? And that goes so far. And I'm a little different though. If you can't tell, I'm kind of extroverted. I'm like, what's the worst I can happen? And let's do it. Come on. But not everybody's like me. And I get that. So that's why this emotional intelligence thing, it's not like, oh, you have high emotional intelligence. Great. You're good. You're golden. Go forth and prosper. Like, this is something people need to work on all the time, right? You're constantly self-reflecting, how you're reacting. Are you proactive, reactive? What are you saying? Are you not saying anything, right? How are you treating people? It's a constant, it's a continuous, continuously going on. These are continuous improvements that you're doing, always self-aware, self-reflection, self-motivation, understanding other people, asking them those questions. How can I help? Having that communication. And it certainly comes easier than others. So from a credibility perspective, I think humility goes a very, very long way. Humility, but at the same time, don't downplay, don't downplay yourself, because that also can be read as a weakness. And some people might think that you're just being, they can take that the wrong way also.
It was an interesting lead in that you had with that of, how can I help you? Where I think a lot of people, especially leadership roles, they come in and it's like, all right, well, how can you help me? Right. Yeah. Like, how can you help me solve the problems that we have going on, or get whatever off the plate, versus how can I come in and actually help you? I think that's an interesting distinction probably that you'd see amongst most leaders, that either on one side or the other of that emotional intelligence spectrum, what am I here for? I think it's also interesting though that, emotional intelligence, as much as it's important for the leadership side, which I think you almost have to gain that via experience. I don't know if there's a class that teaches you that. I mean, back to Raf's point, years ago, I remember managing a team. We had a lot of Indians on the team. You learn by people's experiences in those things, right? You learn who's quiet, who's, a little bit more outgoing, like all those different little things. But you're not going to really get that from a class, because if I got that from a class, quite honestly, it'd be stereotyping any group that I was talking about, right? Because everybody's still different. But there's also the side of the employees have to have that same emotional intelligence, because when we talk about that safe space, as you described it, right, of being able to feel like I can share, you also have to be able to feel like you can take criticism, you can be wrong on what you're sharing, right? We should all feel safe that, yeah, I can share my opinions, but we also have to be able to handle the fact that your opinions aren't going to be right all the time or accepted. Like, how do, that's the other side of that street, obviously on the leadership side of, hey, how do we handle that? But also, I think we're starting to get to that point where people can't handle it. So it's like, I have to accept everything.
That's the distinction you're making, James. That's the distinction you're making better than I did. And it's really, I want to hear everybody's opinion, but I'm not going to necessarily accept everybody's opinion. Like, hey, great. Everybody here matters. Everybody's opinion will be taken into consideration, but some of you are just wrong. Look, this is not a drum circle. Like we're not out here in the forest, giving everybody a hug. Like we have to get business done. And sometimes there's a right way and there are lots of wrong ways. I'm here in life because I've come up with lots. I can write books about the wrong way to do something, right? I can volumes and tomes of the wrong way. But at some point, somebody had to go, that's a great idea, but that is never going to work. I know that from experience. And that's the trust me, right? Something else too. I think there's a fine line between, and this just kind of hit me as you guys were both kind of going back and forth. It just sort of struck me that there's a fine line between a leader coming in and talking and giving you here's why you should listen to me and follow me, versus somebody that just shows up and talks about themselves for an hour in an intro call, right, to the team. Because there is a fine line there. I've been on both, and like, yes, tell me about yourself, why you're here, but then but don't spend an hour doing and then quickly pivot to like what you're gonna do. What James was saying, what's in it for us? Like, how is your appearance here going to benefit the whole, right? And for a lot of us, it's, hey, is my paycheck going to get better? Is my working condition going to get better? Am I going to get promoted? I mean, we're not working. A lot of us don't work for charities, and those that do, God bless you. But a lot of us are motivated by our paychecks and quality of employment. Like, so you get a new leader and they start crowing on about how, they've been in this industry 75 years and they've helped, raise 2 small countries and have a $1 trillion hedge fund. And you're like, that's awesome. It's been 45 minutes. Can we move on? But that's just how it is sometimes, right? There's lots of people with lots of really big egos. And it's hard to avoid that.
Right.
I've killed the conversation. There we go. All right.
I wanted to add to that though, Raph. To be fair, there are a lot of people with really big egos that have done really great things and built really big things. So
that is fair.
I mean, there is a place for that, right? And I mean, the idea is saying, I guess, depends on what level you're at, but there is a place for that. As much as people might want to say like, oh, you did that all wrong, they're the ones, flying around in their $1 million jet and riding on a, $1 billion yacht that happens to, run the company that employs 300,000 people. So
that is, again, correct. You're not wrong. And there's plenty of time. There's time and a place to have, I mean, humility is an important thing, right? But you can have too much of it to the point where you're kind of meek and you don't really have the impact. All right, can I pivot? Because I want to talk about, a little bit about, we're getting close to the end here, or not necessarily, but we can talk for a little bit longer, but we're talking about emotional intelligence. Tell me, because you've got a background as an auditor and we talked about establishing trust and all that and running teams. Tell me how emotional intelligence factors into decision making, because in cyber, a lot of decision making comes down to binary decisions. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this secure? Is this not secure? Right? And that, my personal opinion, I think that maybe just shared by James as well. Stop me if you think I'm wrong, James, but that is how we've gotten to the point where we are, 30 years into our craft, and we're making decisions that are tough to defend, and because they come out as binary, like this is either secure or it's not, we don't get a whole lot of credibility. All right. So tell me about emotional intelligence and how that influences your thinking on risk management.
Ooh.
I'm going to put that on a T for you. Ready?
Okay, let's get started. So, yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. So I'm very grateful for being an auditor. I did not wake up when I was a kid or a teenager or in college or post-college and say, hey, when I grow up, I'm going to be in audit and compliance. It just kind of happened, but I am so grateful that it did, because it gave me so much perspective of the cyber industry and pretty much every single possible pathway. You know, physical security, logical security, as far as network security engineers, cloud security, cryptography, I mean, everything, and operational, from, you know, writing policies and procedures, system security baselines, all that good stuff. So just want to caveat, so any future GRCers out there, do it. So in that role, though, I definitely have been in front of clients who I had to defend what myself or the team has done, for better, for worse. And I've also been in front of clients that quite literally, their paycheck or their next promotion could rely on the fact that they had 3 high findings. You know what I mean? So very delicate. We're talking about quality. You know what I mean? So yeah, and I have had lengthy conversations with business partners, federal government contractors, and employees about risk levels for findings. And, you know, Ralph, you mentioned we live in a binary, or for the most part, our field is very binary. And, you know, I like to think, and this is where I got a lot of my emotional intelligence from, and my empathy and understanding, because I used to be on the other side too. I used to be getting audited, and then I became an auditor. I get a lot of that empathy because I was in the place, right? Having said that, I understand what it's like to be in the other shoes. So me saying, you can argue with me all you want, but if it's a high risk, it's a high risk. Let's talk about how we can lower the risk if you can't completely remediate it. So it's really not black and white. And that might be the difference between, I like to say I'm the good looking auditor, but you know, that's never mind. But yes, and I'm also I'm a rational, we could talk about it auditor too. I'm not going to lower a finding because you're sitting there arguing with me forever. But if you come up with some compensating controls, yeah, let's work it out. And it's almost,
you mean I can't cry my way out of a high finding? Oh man,
only a speeding ticket, Raph.
I'm not even good at that.
You're like, I have a high finding, I got to go to work. Let me out of this ticket.
Don't you know who I am?
I love that. Yeah, so it's just I've had a lot of those tough conversations, and they don't always work out the way that the other person wants them to. And I've had team members that it doesn't work out the way they want them to. I mean, these pen testers, shout out to pen testers, love you guys, gals, theys, thems. You get really excited when you see a high finding, okay? It's like Christmas Day. They're like, we have this high finding. I think it's adorable. I love it so much because that's passion, right? We love passion. But yeah, there could be disappointment or discomfort, all of those things on both sides. So when I've managed the teams, it's been a really great experience, not just because of the depth that I've gotten across all of the cybersecurity professions and different organizations, private industry, federal, state, local, all that stuff, but just actually being able to help people, man. And like, it isn't always binary. Like, let's talk about it. So that self-awareness that I have about how to talk to people, and also not being a pushover, like you guys said, because there is a very fine line, being a total jerk and just being a pushover. And that's not doing anybody any good. If we're really looking at cybersecurity risk, right? I'm here to help you. I'm your trusted advisor. I'm an extension of you.
Isn't mitigating controls though somewhat black and white too? I mean, it's pretty much binary. Like, either the control exists or it doesn't. And most controls are industry agreed upon like what they actually help, right? Like, there's a big difference between saying, hey, we had a high, but we've got this, and this in place that, we can put that to a medium, versus, hey, we've got a high, but, I know you're going through some things at home, and, and you've got, your bonus may be affected if we have 3 highs on here. So let's get that to 2 highs. Like that's a whole different type of feel, for trying to say, hey, let's work to get this laid out.
Whatever, James. No, I guess. I'm just saying, I'm here to help. How can we work through this? But you're right. I mean, it's not like, oh, hey, let's just brush it under the rug. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree that, it's definitely being able to work with people, right? That's a whole different thing, right? I mean, the ability to sit there and say, hey, look, it's a high, we're done here, versus, hey, let's actually talk about your mitigating control. Like that, that should be there anyway. I mean, all too often, I think a lot of people just avoid that, right? They're like, oh, well, the pen tester said this, we're going with it. And we don't have that collaboration that should be there with pretty much everything we're doing, right? We overlook that. What's the overlap with emotional intelligence and like social engineering? Because we talk about having like social skills. I mean, a lot of it, especially when we started this conversation, almost feels like social engineering anyway, right? Like, I mean, we're trying to prey on your emotions, right, to get you to do what we want you to do.
I
know that's how you want me to end this, Graf.
Yeah, I like this very much. How can we reverse engineer social emotional intelligence?
There it is.
Oh man, you're devious. Yeah, no, I'm with that. And that goes back to James, you mentioned like how can we get it's a tit for tat, right? If leadership or whoever is aware of how self-aware and self-motivated and working to get the team and like the criticism, they're gonna have to be able to take it too, right? You dish it, you take it, that's how we're being collaborative. That's how we build that trust and everything. So yeah, I feel like from a social engineering perspective, I mean, shoot, that just gets more sinister. We're not talking about that today, but I feel like that is really kind of what it is. I mean
ultimately that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to use your emotional intelligence against you to say, hey, I want to get this done. Like, how do I get to motivate you? I'm doing the same thing.
You've gone from motivation to manipulation, James. And now we've crossed over to the dark side.
Right? Use the term that you want. Is it not what you're doing? Either case. Either way, we're manipulating.
I mean,
that's a good. Boy, look at the time. I think
one way I'm manipulating to get something, that I shouldn't expect. The other way is we're trying to do it, for good, right? One's the good side, one's the bad side. But I mean, we're still manipulating and using that.
Yeah, I mean that's everything, though. If you really want to get technical,
it really, yeah. I'm there with you. Hey, let me ask you, because we gotta close this off. But I wanted to talk about. I made myself a note before we drop off. Because one of the things that I think emotional intelligence really, really is necessary for is in crisis management. There's a stat I just saw that said in February, and so now it's end of March, but in February, ransomware went, where did I just see? That stat just floated by. In February, ransomware shot up about 73%. There's a lot of people that are going to need some help. And in crisis management is a really bad time to not have any emotional intelligence on your team. Do you want to wrap this episode up by kind of giving us the 411 on how those two cross?
Sure. And I'll just say that, I'm a fan of tabletop tests and being proactive and even DR exercises, but that doesn't compare to when it actually happens, right? Of course, it can certainly make sure you have the proper comms in place, you have your backups together, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing to some degree, but we all know that things do not work out the way they should be, period. So to that point, I think it's important to start building that within your team as soon as possible, because you don't want, like you said, Ralph, like when you're in that moment of responding to an incident and crisis management, you got to understand who's going to be, well, hopefully you don't have anybody in your IR team that can't be calm under pressure, but you got to understand knowing that, trusting your team that they're going to be able to react accordingly, being calm under pressure, being able to communicate effectively. Again, going back to like, are they able to handle it? Do they need some help? Like, we don't have time to be, I'm going to get it. And then you don't. And, obviously seconds, minutes count. understanding empathy and understanding, to your point, James, like maybe there is something going on at home, right? Like, so having that rapport going on within your team and on an ongoing basis. And that's where, we talk about having a diverse environment, understanding time, global environments, like just being able to understand where your team is, not just geographically or mentally even, or emotionally, but just understanding who you're working with at that time, because those things change. So, and being able to be adaptive and flexible. Obviously, again, nothing always goes as planned. So again, this isn't novel, going back to understanding everybody's strengths and weaknesses. But I think that, just to wrap up in summary, when dealing with a crisis, we don't have time to be figuring out what everybody's going through. We need to be able to jive as a team, have that safe environment, being able to play off of our strengths, and everybody knowing what they should. So I'm a fan of tabletop and all that. Don't get me wrong there, but it's an ongoing exercise. So take care of your people, and they'll take care of you. Period.
Yeah, I think it's a good. I think the crisis management really highlights the establishment, the required need to establish credibility, because people won't follow you into danger or into hot situations like, hey, everything in our environment is locked up, ransomware. Here's what I need everybody to do. If your team doesn't have faith in you that you're doing the right things for the right reasons at the right speed, you got a problem. And not just your team, I'm guessing those that you work with and those that you report to, because then you've got, second guessing happens and people hesitate. And in a crisis is a really crappy time to make a mistake and have to wonder, am I going to be in trouble if I make a judgment call and I'm wrong? Right. So those are, I think those are the kind of the highlights for me from that kind of that little summary that you gave. I appreciate that. All right.
I think it also highlights, though, how important it is before you get to that to understand each other, right? Both from the leadership understanding the employees and the employees understanding the leadership, because you get into that crisis mode. Like, I already know on my team, who's quick to react to certain things, who's slower to react to certain things, how they react to certain types of news. So in that situation, right, you can better adjust and say, okay, look, things are going crazy. I know this one's already, this person's already kind of hyper anxious about what's going on. We handle that a little bit differently. I'll have a little bit more grace or stuff around that. But then on the flip side, hopefully your team understands how you work, right? And you get into that crisis mode. And when you're saying things that are maybe in a different tone, right? Or you're alluding to certain things, right? They know whether it's like, they're in crisis mode, it's cool, like let it roll off. If they don't really mean it like that, that's not how it's coming across, versus, yeah, that person's pretty much that type of person. And, the heck with, you start to understand each other, to almost going back to that trust that you were talking about, and as a team, we know each other. And, especially in crisis, we're going to say things, we're going to do things that, hopefully you're going to be able to understand and interpret the right way and not jump to conclusion. It's like reading something in email or text message, and you're like, I didn't say it like that at all, but they read it completely different.
But you said it right. I
right?
100% with you there. That one I can sympathize with completely. All right, Jess, thanks so much for joining us on this one. This has been fun.
Thanks.
Good gracious. This is it's an interesting topic. I think there's a lot of sensitivity. There's a lot of fine lines here, right? Like, you can't run your employees and your team like the I was gonna say like the military, but even in the military you need trust and leadership, and you need so they're not robots. People aren't robots, and I think finding that middle ground, that happy medium, is very key to not just, I think, times of crisis, but just times of just prosperity, getting things done, and being able to effectively work with the globally diverse workforce that we are. This is the new reality. It's not going back. We're not all going to work, in the same building from the same neighborhood anymore. Those days are gone, and being different makes us stronger and better. But those differences can be hard to manage if we're not fully conscious of them. So thanks again. I appreciate you being on the show, Jess. It's been great.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. I hope you picked something up out of this and learned. It's a good 45 minutes spent with you. And if you have, of course, any kind of questions, thoughts on, or comments, concerns, whatever, send us a note, either via the LinkedIn page, either through chat, or just leave a post, comment underneath when we release this. And we'll try to rope Jess into kind of jumping in with us again at some point in the future, maybe. And we'll leave it at that, folks. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole